The rights of assembly and free speech really are in the public domain right now. What's going on in the United States is something akin to the Vietnam War movement, and perhaps can find parallels in the segregation protests of the 1960s. Wherever you are, welcome to another edition of My Take on China. Nothing stirs up the US quite like division, and nothing prevents free speech and the right of peaceful assembly more than when that division is because one opinion goes against the narrative of the US government. The government says Israel has the right of self-defense. Students on campuses all around the country disagree, or at least if they don't disagree on the right of self-defense, they most certainly disagree on the level this excuse has been used. It isn't my place to decide what's right and what's wrong. The International Court of Justice seems to think these students are right and they have a point, but their government does not. We're normally allowed to express opinions on what we believe is right or wrong, and the beauty of free speech is that others can disagree, and if we choose, we can either agree to disagree, or we can have a debate about it where I share my opinion, you share yours, and in the end, we can still agree to disagree. But that's only possible if we're allowed to. It seems in the USA right now, people are no longer allowed to disagree. I live in China. I've seen much criticism of the Chinese government. I've seen protests in colleges. In 2022, there were many, apparently over 80 campuses where protests were going on. But you know what? Even the most anti-China media can't find a single case of a student being arrested. Not one charged, not a single conviction or prison sentence. The best we can get for authoritarianism is one report, which I've linked, where the police arrived and, wait for it, they sent the students home. Those protests were all over China, not a single report of an arrest, and it gets better, or worse, depending on your perspective. In Xinjiang, where 12% of the global population have been misinformed that there's a genocide going on, we saw extensions of those protests. We watched as video showed hundreds of people storming into the streets, protesting about the lockdowns. And again, not one person was arrested. No one has been charged. And here's the most damning evidence yet that China isn't the oppressed state that the 12% think it is. Those people were protesting for a relaxation of COVID restrictions, and guess what they got? That's it. They got a relaxation of COVID restrictions. Yet in the USA over the last few days, we've seen hundreds of arrests, probably in fact thousands by now. The University of California, Berkeley, reported 100, Yale 45, New York's Columbia more than 100, Emerson in Boston another 100, Minnesota only 9. But who knows what the number will be by the time this video is posted. And apparently the feeling is one of anti-Semitism, but the reality is it's one of despair. And this is where the rights of free speech and the rights of peaceful assembly fall over, because the protesters' opinions are not in keeping with the government narrative. There may very well be some anti-Semitic remarks. There may even be some anti-Semitic actions. But the vast majority of people protesting right now are not anti-Semitic. They're anti-murder, anti-genocide. And if we ask them, they'll probably 100% agree that Hamas actions on October the 7th were wrong, but they will almost certainly understand the desperation born out of many years of peaceful protest and forceful apartheid that created the conditions for it. The actions of students in America 50 years ago, when the Vietnam War was coming to its end, are now deemed to have been correct. The government attempted to stop them. Many people were arrested. Some even died. The actions of students in America 70 years ago, when the United States was moving from a segregated country to an assimilated one, where African Americans were finally recognized as real people, humans, who could share a class or a football field with white people are now deemed to be correct. Again, many were arrested and some died. And so the pattern begins again. Many people look at what's going on in Gaza and they agree it's a genocide, it's abhorrent, and protests against it must be loud, they must be forceful, and they must be right. But we can be sure there will be more arrests. There are most likely going to be some deaths. And at the end of the day, we'll look at this and say, those students were right. Those police and National Guardsmen and women were wrong. How many more protests are the students of America going to die for before they have their voices heard? One is too many. Thanks very much for watching my take on China, which was mostly about America, but believe me, in China, we don't get that. Bye for now.